Today, we're going to look at a variety of tables and a variety of graphs to identify which relations are functions. So which tables are functions and which graphs are functions. So when you look at a table or even at coordinates, we kind of want to start by looking at the X column. And in order for something to be a function, you have to have all different X's, like all different numbers for X. Or if you have a repeating X value, it has to be with one Y value. It can't be with more than one. So we always look at the X column first. So if we look at this first example, we notice that all of the X's are different. So when all of the X's are different, this is automatically going to be a function. And if we go ahead and look at the second example, and we look at the X's, you might notice that the X repeats here and also here. So if you have a repeating X value, it has to be mapped with the same Y value. And if it's not a function. For instance, if this table were to have a 9 with a negative 18 and another 9 with a negative 18, it would be a function. Or even a 9 with a 17 and a 9 with a 17 again down here. So I'm just going to have you be practicing on identifying what is a function versus what is not, and just remembering as you look at the table, if you see a repeating X value, it has got to be with the same Y value to be a function. We also talk about identifying functions from graphs, and there's a couple practice sheets on here. So we call functions if they pass the vertical line test. So a relation is considered a function if it passes the vertical line test. And what does that really mean? That just means if I draw a vertical line through any point on my shape, if it crosses through just one time at any given X value, it's a function. So for instance, if I drew a vertical line here, it only crosses through once through that little hook-like shape. And I want to do a few lines just to make sure. It only crosses through once for every vertical line. So if I draw that vertical line and it crosses through that shape just one time, for every single vertical line that I draw, then it is a function. Even if I drew one right here, you'll see it only hits that shape one time. So this would be a function. Let me try to see if there's an example on here of one that is not a function that we can do. So if we scroll down to number 9 on this sheet, it's a little bit harder to see due to how this worksheet copied, but you can tell there's an L-like shape here for the graph. So if I draw a vertical line, it just passed through at all of these points. So since that L-like shape does not pass the vertical line test, there are multiple points going through that portion of the graph. This would not be a function. So that's one thing to notice. Another example of something that may not be a function is this one up here, because when I go to draw a vertical line, and you only have to really draw one to kind of see it, it passes through 2 points. So that would not be a function. And that's very similar to the tables. That means that this particular X value has been assigned 2 different Y values, which makes it not a function. So there's a few you can practice. There's a whole nother page of graphs as well on the next page in this packet or on your PDFs on the classroom. So just drawing those vertical lines And noticing if that vertical line passes through more than one time on the shape, then it's not a function. Sometimes we'll also see functions being evaluated in the case of coordinates. So you might see, instead of a table, I just wanted to hit on this really briefly because it is on the next quiz, but you might have some coordinates listed out for you, like 5, 2, 5, 3, 5, 1. And since you have all these repeating x's and they're with different y's, this would be not a function. So sometimes you'll have just coordinates listed, and I don't think I have you do a practice sheet on it since tables and coordinates are so similar. But just knowing that it's okay if the x value repeats. For instance, if these were all the same number, like 5, 2, 5, 2, 5, 2, that would be a function. But when they're different numbers, it's not. So keeping that in mind. If you need a formal formula for that, you could just write x with a little arrow after it to the y. That means all x's are mapped to the same y value. Yep. So you always want to start looking at that x column first, and then if you're doing vertical line tests, just making sure that as you're practicing these, if it crosses through on that shape at more than one point at the same time, that is not a function. Versus something that you draw that line and it only crosses through at one point, it is a function. You probably learned this in Algebra 1, but it's just a little review before we go into evaluating functions. But as always, if you do have questions or you just need more practice or are concerned, just let me know. I'm here to help.